right. Hello and welcome to Nimble Neighbourhoods, our most recent trend in the Place Edition series. I'm Stefanie Bhim.
I'm Stefanie Matosevic.
And we're from Brickfields Consulting. We're a market research firm specialising in the built environment. So we help developers, property owners, governments and architects better understand their communities and the people they're designing for. So we do this through quantitative and qualitative analysis of developments across retail, workplace, residential, transport, education, arts and culture. We spread ourselves quite wide, and we convert our research into place value propositions, architectural briefs, and lately return to work strategies as well. So for the last 10 years, we've also specialised in defining the most important trends to the built environment. And so that brings us here today.
Yeah, today we're going to present to you some of the highlights from our Nimble Neighbourhoods report to provide you with some inspiration as you line up your projects for 2021. We'll be reviewing neighbourhoods that are more holistic in their amenity, economically flexible for renters, owners and small businesses, environmentally sustainable, and ones that use technology in a really meaningful way. As you watch this, if you have any questions or thoughts, please let us know in the comments, as we'd love to hear them. And let's dive straight in.
Okay, great. Our first trend is holistic havens. So I'll just share my screen so you can follow along with the images. So this is probably one of my favorite trends in the whole article, and we probably could have written a whole report on it in its own right. And for us, holistic havens are defined by the emergence of developments that are really putting people at their centre. And as such, they're more inclusive of diverse groups, they're rich in curated amenity and social capital, and they're really specific to the on-site communities that live there. So the shift towards this development has been driven by ageing populations in the developed world, also increased levels of loneliness, reduced community participation, but also a heightened level of public awareness. As we've seen from the pandemic, people are increasingly aware of their own mental and physical well-being. And as such, they're looking to their neighbourhoods to see how their locales can facilitate their day-to-day livelihoods. And as a result of all of these factors, we believe that renters and buyers will increasingly seek out developments that have high levels of social amenity and capital. So one aspect that holistic havens are manifesting is through inclusive neighbourhoods. And this can be cultural, social, or economic. And one of my favourite examples of cultural inclusion is the Senok development in Vancouver, which is led by the Squamish Nation, which is an Indigenous community native to British Columbia. And I think one of the most tangible ways that they're delivering on this is of 6,000 of the dwelling units they've proposed, 70 to 90% are set aside for renters rather than owner-occupiers. So they're really looking to the affordability crisis in Vancouver and directly addressing it. And housing is also designated for members of their Squamish community. So I think this is really interesting because in the process of urban development and First Nations peoples, such collaborations are often quite fraught, and the best or the most appropriate cultural outcomes aren't often achieved. Did you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I think this example is particularly interesting in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement and the mainstreaming of racial bias awareness. I think in the built environment, this is something that we don't often see as issues that affect us directly, but it's really important to be conscious that every design and policy decision we make has a cultural repercussion, especially in post-colonial cities like in Australia and New Zealand.
And I think just to round this example up, I think overall the scale and the intent of this development, as you can see, it's highly modern and urban. It really shows that urban and Indigenous development can coexist. Older generations are also a group which often get marginalised or excluded in our neighbourhoods. And we've talked about this quite a lot.
Yeah, so by 2030, the number of people globally aged 60 and older is expected to grow by 56%, which brings us to 1.4 billion. And this is really prompting a rethink of how an aging population can be housed.
Yeah, that's a huge stat. And I think it's really important to look to Eastern cultures because they have a different approach to how they care for their older generations. So we were fortunate enough a couple of years ago to visit Singapore and the Kampong Admiralty development, which we've got here on the slides. So it's a vertical village specifically for older generations. They live on site, but they also have all the different amenities that they would need tailored to their age group, such as essential amenities in healthcare, community centres, vegetable gardens. But they also have a hawker centre and a really porous ground plane. And I think this is what creates the success of this development, is because the ground plane invites other members of the community of different ages, so the older generations can interact with them and just be part of a lively urban centre in a sense, rather than being segregated, which can exacerbate loneliness. The next way that Holistic Havens manifests for us is this concept of city microcosms. So we've been seeing suburban areas step up with mixed-use housing product that emulates the vibrancy of city life. And this is pertinent as we're seeing more cohorts of younger people that love urban areas but can't necessarily afford to live here. They're also less car reliant, and they're looking to outer urban areas, but still seeking that same experience of that cities provide. So one example which is doing this really well is Mehr als Wohnen in Zurich, which is a partnership between the city of Zurich and 50 cooperatives, which is a really huge amount because in a number of cities around the world, you don't have a similar level of that cooperative scale. I think the development's biggest success is in the breadth of housing typologies on site. So you've got student accommodation, co-housing, multi-generational living, and subsidised homes. And what this does is it draws together really diverse demographics. So you almost have a city microcosm in its sense, but in an outer suburban area. Also successful about this development is the presence of diverse retail and commercial amenity.
Yeah, I think diversity in price and offer is really important, but we also need to think about diversity of ownership and creating an atmosphere that is really locally driven. It's a really important factor in making a place distinct and really growing local equity. So while it's an easy win for new developments to draw in successful models that have worked elsewhere, I think it's more important to complement these with locally run initiatives and businesses and really give an opportunity for new startups and mum and dad businesses.
Yes, the mum and dad.
A place to be.
Yeah, because that's really, I think when we travel to different cities, the really kind of authentic mum and pop shops are the things that are really memorable and that we tend to seek out.
Yeah.
And the final aspect of Holistic Havens is this concept of hyper mixed use. So city fringe developments are maximising smaller footprints to offer a greater breadth of experience whilst also diversifying their risk. So this isn't necessarily a new trend, but we're seeing a maturing of this idea where the most progressive concepts are going beyond F&B and retail, but integrating cultural uses. And while we are talking about residential here, I think the more interesting typology is emerging in the hospitality sector, where we're seeing hotels flip their offering and become more outward facing in the communities that they're in. So for example, a work-live hotel in Amsterdam called Zoku is doing just this. Instead of, so with their accommodation, they're starting to rent out their rooms as private offices or temporary or bookable office spaces. They're also running short-term wellness retreats for local members of the community and also private dining experiences, as well as an array of other cultural experiences. So I think this is, this is a really interesting flip we're seeing in different asset classes to create a more vibrant neighbourhood. So in terms of wrapping up this particular trend on holistic havens, what were your key takes on that?
I think my key takes are diversity in amenity and the presence of local businesses and organisations. To me, that's the most important thing in making a place really local and distinct. And this should always complement bigger chains and bigger brands.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, my take was about approaching development from an inclusive stance. So thinking about audiences that often get overlooked, particularly, as you mentioned, Steph, with the Black Lives Matter movement. We can't ignore diverse ethnic groups anymore. And sometimes appealing to diverse age groups, demographics, and ethnicities can create a really distinct and meaningful place that can draw other experiences and people to it in ways that you couldn't have imagined. So yeah, it's a really meaningful trend. It's definitely one of my favourites.
Yes.
So I'll hand over to Steph now to take us through economic flexibility.
Yeah, so local economies, as we know, are a really vital part of neighbourhoods. Over the past 10 years plus, we've seen a growing interest in alternative methods of financing, investment and local business support, which is really driven by this kind of perceived failure of traditional and maybe inequitable economic models. So the first way we see this manifest is in this idea of more equitable home ownership. We found this example in Auckland. So this is a medium density urban village, which is made up of 30 townhouses, and it's set in Ngaiti Watu Orokai, their ancestral land. So this model has seen the local Maori community act independently as the landowner, the developer, the facilitator, and even the bank.
That's so empowering, just to when you frame it up like that.
Yeah, it gives these communities a lot more autonomy than I think they've previously had since colonisation.
Yeah.
The success of this project is the purchasing process. So they provide the local community the ability to purchase a home with just a 5% deposit. They set their mortgage repayment rates at the equivalent of affordable market rental rates. And they also reduce the cost of the home by selling just the home and not the land.
Yeah, and these particular steps have really helped overcome systemic barriers in financial literacy, but also the debt experienced by the community. So it's one way to really start changing and breaking the cycles of poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. Another way we're seeing this equitable ownership movement spread in our neighbourhoods is this New Story project, which is in Latin America. So this is the world's first 3D printed community. This project will include affordable, high-quality homes of about 55 square metres, and these can be constructed in just 24 hours. And the design really reflects and incorporates cultural and lifestyle habits of these communities.
And I think to that point of making it really culturally specific, I think that's probably the most interesting part of this case study, is because often affordable solutions compromise on quality, quality and quality of life.
Yeah.
But this trend shows that you can deliver that quality in a really culturally sensitive way.
Yeah, definitely. The next way we're seeing this trend manifest is in alternative models or alternative ways of financing essential services such as childcare. This example is Grasshoppers in the Park. It's an interesting case study because it addresses the high costs of childcare, and it's challenging the kind of traditional model we see everywhere. This particular model is run by the New Economics Foundation and the Family and Childcare Trust. It uses a banded fee structure, which is directly linked to family income, and it also provides an opportunity to reduce childcare fees in exchange for parents working at the centre. So this can include things like taking the children for a walk to the park or running a community event or a fundraiser.
And this is a really great example because it changes the dial on affordability. But I think one thing we have to remember is that these models also need to be followed by really meaningful policy change.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're going to stick.
Yeah. In terms of my key takeaways from this trend overall, for me personally, I guess it's that alternative finance models are extremely important in a world with increasing economic segregation, because it connects capital and resources and therefore opportunities to less advantaged people and groups, and it can really be a game changer in breaking cycles of poverty.
And then we have even more, for want of a better word, productive or vibrant local communities when people feel empowered that they can get education or seek other ways of elevating themselves. Definitely a win-win if we can get that going. My favourite takeout from this is I really loved the Fuse project, the 3D printed community. I'm fascinated by how we can create economies of scale as long as they're environmentally sustainable. But I think when we pair these developments in tech with localised research, we can see the potential for tackling urban problems in different contexts with cost-effective ways.
Yeah. Moving on to the next trend now, I want to speak about sustainability. So we're obviously at a point globally where we cannot deny climate change. Sustainability is a baseline expectation, and it's really a non-negotiable for new developments, as well as the adaptation of existing ones. There's lots of different ways to approach sustainability. One of them is behaviour change and influencing new habits. This can happen at a grassroots level, but it can also happen at a city level. So, for example, the city of Helsinki is doing a really great job, we think, of this with their My Helsinki website. So the website showcases green restaurants, galleries and local businesses which meet the city's sustainability criteria. It really helps visitors and locals make environmentally conscious decisions in a way that's very easy, and they don't really have to put the work in. So I find when it's, the easy option, that's kind of the best way to change behaviour.
Yes, definitely. And I think to your point about helping visitors and locals to make that change, it's interesting that the city of Helsinki have been the ones leading this change and have published the ethical businesses on their website, which is essentially their front door to prospective visitors and relocators and international businesses, and essentially future talent too. So it's possible that credible sustainability initiatives like this can be a strategy for cities to grow and also be competitive and attract growing cohorts of ethically minded individuals that hopefully post-pandemic are a lot more mobile.
Yeah. Another way we're seeing sustainability be approached in neighbourhoods is circular systems. So these systems see places generate their own resources and recycle waste in ways that aim for zero landfill. The Ocean X City concept by Bjarke Ingels Group is a very, very futuristic example, I think, which showcases this idea. So this is a floating neighbourhood which can rise with the sea level. Energy production is harnessed from wind and water, and it also uses this bio-rock material, which enables the regeneration of marine habitats kind of underneath the parts which float. This concept has captured support from the UN, but don't you think we should resolve our land management issues before we start building on water?
Yeah, I do. I do think this is incredibly visionary, but I think you're definitely right. But we don't need to discount the whole example completely. Yeah. I think it can better serve as a solution for research outposts for scientists or aquaculturists rather than a definitive alternative to living on land.
Yeah, or agricultural, urban farming, stuff like that. Yeah. Car-free neighbourhoods are another way to tackle sustainability. This is something we've been talking about for years now.
Yeah.
Research shows that cities devote up to 70% of public space to accommodate cars, while only 25% is suggested to create a truly sustainable design.
Yeah, that's massive.
Yeah. So while we've been talking about this for a really long time, it hasn't quite yet hit the mainstream in terms of implementing and delivering on the ground. But there are some really great examples that are emerging out of Europe. For example, the city of Utrecht is creating the Netherlands' first high-density car-free residential district, which can accommodate about 12,000 people. So this district has really strong parking disincentives, which make it really expensive. They don't have designated parking, and they provide a ratio of only one space for every 3 households, which is really kind of progressive and, big move.
Yeah, it's really starting to shift the dial on, I guess, making people consider, should I own a car? Should I sell my car? It's, I guess, what you said before about if we make sustainability convenient or inconvenient,
absolutely, yeah,
then we can shift behaviour in that way. So I think developers and councils can have a big role to play in this by, I guess, approaching how they implement parking.
Yeah. Did you have any other key takeaways from sustainability before we move on?
Yes, I think that we need to approach sustainability in a way that's imperfect but constant. So I think it's about implementing lots of things, even if they aren't perfect. And while we've presented some really visionary and futuristic and high-tech examples, I think there's definitely a place for all of those, but there's lots of small grassroots solutions that can be implemented and that definitely shouldn't be sniffed at. So even things like local composting systems, agricultural systems, reduced car spaces, as we just talked about, cycle routes, and which are all baseline and necessary.
Yeah. Just continuing on from that point, I think that while tactical solutions are really necessary and great in building traction, overall we really need to recognise that climate change is a social and political problem, and we can't solve it from design alone, unfortunately. And we really need to think about addressing the root causes, then applying solutions to the outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point there too, that it being a social and economic problem. So I think we need to get better at having those public, private and local community partnerships.
And be much more collaborative. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the final trend, which is tech enablers. It's one of my favorites as well, because I love technology and seeing like how far we can push things, even if it scares me. So I think we're definitely reaping the benefits of the last decade of innovation. We've got a number of tech platforms which have emerged to help us plan communities, create social connections, and really reconfigure our neighbourhoods in ways we haven't thought about yet. And so one of the ways this is manifesting is through data-led development. And of course, we're biased here because we're both researchers and we love urban development. But I think the biggest privilege of working in the built environment is that we shape people's day-to-day experience. And I think with that comes a big responsibility in making sure the decisions that us as consultants propose and then equally as developers implement, they really need to be founded on evidence tied to a human need or future trends that are credible. So the good news is that there are lots of consultancies emerging and leveraging technology that captures data in really interesting and niche ways. So one platform doing this is Commonplace in the UK. So that's a tool which, if you can see in the top left image, it's a tool which individuals can log on and geolocate different areas and things that they would like to change in their community. So a council or a property owner can log in and see which issues are gaining traction and help direct their investment. At Brickfields Consulting, we also run different types of research. Place IQ is one that we do, which is a benchmarking study, and it quantifies behaviour, spend and dwell time directly tied to town centres, retail, commercial assets, as well as leisure and residential spaces. So this data is something that we cut by demographics, but we also complement it with qualitative research, as I think this is one of the most meaningful ways to get a rich picture of how communities use or don't use public spaces.
Yeah, while we've seen these tools, they've really allowed, been a positive development for the industry and allowed for really easy evidence-based decision making. I don't think it replaces the need for really rich qualitative data or deep observation studies, which often reveal, like you said, small and important nuances that aren't obvious or can't be quantified.
Great. And then the next aspect of this trend, where technology is really serving a meaningful purpose, is in facilitating community connections between people in their local neighbourhoods. So a great example doing this is Nextdoor, which is an app which showcases the resources and happenings in a neighbourhood. And one thing that they launched during the pandemic was an extra feature called the Help Map. And this allowed individuals that were isolated to send out a message and say, hey, I need some groceries, or I need someone to look after my kids, or I'm lonely. Is anyone free for a chat this afternoon? And people who were willing to give their help could connect and provide that help. And I think this is really interesting because it goes back to that social capital aspect that we were talking about before.
Yeah, I think it's really pertinent for neighbourhoods that may have low rates of, people knowing each other personally. And platforms like this provide an avenue to amplify, the local experience. It really facilitates the development of social capital, which can't be manufactured.
Yeah, I think property owners are always looking for that silver bullet of like, how can we create a sense of community? And
I don't think it's about creating, it's about allowing others to create.
Yeah, but providing the tools for people to take it and run. And then the final aspect of this trend is decentralized experiences. And so this is about global think tanks and even automotive companies exploring the role of smart technology in how we reconfigure our urban environments. So an example which I find quite exciting and a little bit scary is the Woven City by Toyota and Bark Ingalls Group. So this is currently in the works, and it's a hybrid residential community meets AI robotics laboratory. And so they've decided to relegate logistics hubs and research processes underground. So above ground is really prioritised for pedestrians, as well as autonomous vehicles and cycling. So it's quite an interesting and progressive move from an automotive company. And what I think here is really interesting is that shift in city making, which is showing that it's not just the domain of governments and developers anymore, but big corporations are having their foray into co-creating the urban experience.
Yeah. I think it's obviously really fascinating having these new big players on the scene. And I think we're seeing the maturing of all of the evolution of public-private partnerships, which are previously the domain of infrastructure projects and, traditional residential projects. I do really think we need to be conscious of how we regulate these new PPPs and how we manage them.
Steph is our resident expert in public policy, so I turn to her for all things policy and government. And then the final example in this trend is mobile autonomous vehicles that can also reconfigure our urban spaces in quite lovely and tactical ways. So a few concepts have been released by design studio IDEO and also Space 10, a Danish studio. This one here is Space on Wheels. And the most meaningful aspect of this for me is the fact that they've created concepts called Farm on Wheels, but also mobile treatment labs. So these vehicles, the intent is to deploy them to communities suffering from that last mile problem where they don't have access to essential services. But these autonomous vehicles can get out there and provide that. It's also a great avenue for councils and developers with underserviced greenfield sites that are still in construction but would benefit from really nimble mobile options. And IDEO have also released a workplace option, which is quite interesting given the era that we're living in of remote work. And could we call a autonomous work vehicle on demand so we could enjoy our workplace on a pier, for example, if we're lucky enough to live on the water.
Yeah.
So these all raise really interesting conversations around technology and how we configure our urban experience. What are your key takes from this?
Yeah, I think while there are a lot of data sources available, it can be really tempting to cherry pick from, the very easily accessible and vast sources of information that we have now. And like I said earlier, for me, I just think it's really important to continue engaging with qualitative and quantitative studies to capture the nuances in the market. And this, I think, is how you can really set your place or neighbourhood apart.
Yeah, definitely. I think technology obviously presents a huge opportunity. Like, we've been witnessing the most immense change in the last 10 years. And I think as decision makers, we just need to be critical about the implications of the technology we choose to implement and really think through all the scenarios. Like, if I implement this, will the effect be positive or negative, or who seeks to gain, who seeks to lose, and asking all of those rich questions.
Yeah, I think it's important to use this tech to help us rather than let it take us
off track,
drag us somewhere. Yeah,
exactly. We've seen the ill effects of tech. They're having their big tobacco moment. So, so that leads us to the end of our snapshot of Nimble Neighbourhoods. If you like what you've heard today, please download the report. We'll put the link in the comments below. And I guess as an overarching comment, what has stuck out to me through this research process that we've gone on and in writing it, Nimble Neighbourhoods isn't just an outcome, but it's really a mindset. And so while we use research to inform development decisions, we need to remember that places are never set and forget, that they are always evolving. And so an iterative approach to continual research, tracking, and for you as property owners out there to be to embrace that constant iteration, I think will really set your place apart in its flexibility and constant tailoring to the changing needs of communities and the market. Steph, what's your major takeout?
As we saw during the pandemic, the neighbourhoods built on strong foundations are really proving to be the most enduring and resilient in a crisis. I think we've really learned a lot in the last year. So the most enduring neighbourhoods are the ones that include the building blocks that contribute to this creation of a very diverse and supportive and inclusive community for all people. So I think this trend demonstrates a progressive move towards a more holistic view of community. You know, it's not just about opportunities to meet neighbours. It goes further than that, and it's also about building local networks, sharing resources, civic engagement, and non-discriminatory inclusion and reciprocity.
Yeah, well summed up. Overall, the outlook is really optimistic.
Yeah.
There's plenty to be inspired by to make positive change. So we hope you've really enjoyed this webinar, and we'd love to hear from you too. Please tell us in the comments, is there something that you'd like to know more about? Have you already implemented something that we've discussed? And do you have learnings to share? So please join the conversation and let's keep talking about it. And if you're a property owner, a developer or government organisation, or even an architect, if you're interested in commissioning bespoke research to better understand your audiences and help guide investment and make your asset more competitive, do reach out to us. We'd love to help you navigate 2021. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
See you next time.